This week on Dig Me Out. With your hosts, Jason Ziak and Tim Minichi.
Jay, we're back again with another episode thanks to our Dig Me Out Union on Patreon. You can help us make the next episode happen by joining us at dmounion.com or digmeoutunion.com. And speaking of that union, Jay, this album that we're going to talk about came to us via the Tournament of Death.
That's right.
This was our September tournament where 18 albums entered in 2 rounds of 9. And then we took the top vote getters and it was a final of 5, actually. There was a tie in one of the rounds. So a three-way tie for last. That's a something. That's an album or something. And all these albums came to us via our website, digmeoutpodcast.com, which is where anybody can go and suggest a record anywhere in the world. If you're in Antarctica, heck, if you're on the space station up in outer space, you can send us an album suggestion and we will consider it for one of our polls. Just saying, astronauts. We're targeting the astronaut demographic going forward. Really trying to break into that demographic. Current and former astronauts. I don't know why. Just seems like an untapped market, to be quite honest, that we should be tapping.
Please write a formal business plan and submit it.
Okay, will do. So for September, these were the suggestions via digmeoutpodcast.com. And this is what we had our folks at Patreon vote for. Suggested in round 1, In the West by Silkworm. That was suggested by Willie Dillon. Pictures of 1,000 Faces by Eric Gales, suggested by Richard Waterman. Total Vegetility, The Cucumbers, suggested by Bill Davidson. The Sounds of Solid by Sugartooth, suggested by Eric Peterson. Limbo by Throwing Muses, suggested by Andrew McGinnis. Demon Box by Motorpsycho, suggested by William Spevek. You Are Freaking Me Out by Samiam, suggested by Joseph Long. Punk Rock, A Comedy Fight Song, all one word, by Down by Law, suggested by David Tribble. And Ruby Red from the Dam Builders, suggested by Kyle Bittner. Now, in this round, the top vote getters were number 1, Samiam, You Are Freaking Me Out. And we had a tie at number 2. The second pick was actually 2 picks. We got the Dam Builders, Ruby Red, and Throwing Muses, Limbo. So those 3 made it into the final round. And there's not, you know what I like about that? There's not a ton of like really big bands there. Those are all like, for the most part, artists I've heard of, listened to at some point, but nothing crazy.
Yep. Solid candidates for Dig Me Out.
All very solid candidates. Now, for round 2, Con Art by Smart Went Crazy, suggested by Willie Dillon. Zucker Baby, self-titled, suggested by Richard Waterman. I feel like that's been in a poll before. Because that name sticks out.
It does. Yeah, it was nominated a few months ago.
Also, is that what Mark Zuckerberg calls his kid? Zucker Baby?
Zucker Baby? I hope so.
No,
that's his name in the metaverse.
Got it. Demanufacture by Fear Factory, suggested by Eric Peterson. Beheaded by Chris Harford and the First Rays of the New Rising Sun, suggested by Bill Davidson. University by Throwing Muses, suggested by Andrew McGinnis. I'd like to point out that Andrew got 2 picks, both Throwing Muses, into these 2 polls. Radiance in brackets by Anatheum, suggested by Keith Badge. Sweet FA by Love and Rockets, suggested by Patrick Testa. Electric Rock Music by the Ass Ponies, suggested by Pete Krigler. And Blood Music by Chapter House, suggested by Vadim Taver. Now, when Vadim suggests stuff, usually that means it's going into the final. Not this time, though. It was Fear Factory's Demanufacture and Throwing Muses University. So that means in the final 5, Throwing Muses had 2 records. That's never happened before.
I know. It's pretty cool.
Along with the Dam Builders, Samiam, and Fear Factory. So how
I have
did
to
this shake
say,
out?
I was pulling for University a little bit. I had some time with that album. I was kind of looking forward to going back to it.
I remember that from college, and I remember liking that record a lot. So here's the interesting thing. I cannot figure out this poll. So Sam I Am, You Are Freaking Me Out. That's our winner. 36%. Second place, Throwing Muses University. So you're probably thinking, oh, it split the vote with itself. Nope. Limbo got 0 votes. 0. Nada.
But it came
nothing.
down to it, if you're going to put you only get 1 vote in this round. So if you're going to vote for Throwing Music's album, I think we got a pretty definitive take on which album was stronger.
Well, I think it's crazy that I figured going into it, it was going to split the vote and it was going to ruin it. It's going to wreck itself.
Yeah.
Because it didn't check itself. But that's not what happened. So Fear Factory ended up with 24% and the Dam Builders with 12%. So our winner, Sam I Am, You Are Freaking Me Out. That was suggested by Joseph Long. He said, refined blend of punk with alternative and pop, a lot of solid albums, tried to go big, Jawbreaker, Doughboys, RFTC, Seaweed, etc. So those are the bands that we've talked about before. They're in the same wheelhouse. And nobody except for Chip Midnight went for this in the final. He said, honestly, would love to hear all these reviewed. I went with Sam I Am because I love that album but it was released on a weird label that also had Anthrax and Vanilla Ice.
Oh my goodness.
We talked a bit about it on Chip Chat's podcast, which we thoroughly and wholeheartedly endorse. He did an episode with Serge and Sean from the band Sam I Am, who just this March put out a new record called Stowaway, their first one since 2011. I reviewed it for the Box newsletter, and I gave it a worthy album. It's quite a good record, and I had never listened to Sam I Am before. That's where I'm going with this. I've never listened to Sam I Am except for the brand new record they put out this year. So, Jay, had you ever listened to Sam I Am?
No. I mean, I knew the name. It's a memorable name.
Right.
Kind of knew the bands that they were mentioned around, but I wasn't even quite generally expected what they sound like, but was thinking it was like a pop punk thing.
Yes. So this record has an interesting history. So they were one of the bands that got signed to a major label, right? They put out their first album, self-titled, in 1990 on the label New Red Archives. And that's where the next 2 records, Soar in 91 and Billy in 92, they're both released on that label. Then they signed to Atlantic Records. And Atlantic puts out Clumsy in 1994, which, you sign to a major label. 94 is the year we just talked about. Bad Religion. It was also the year of Green Day and The Offspring. This is the year pop punk is exploding. So, of course, Sam I Am gets gobbled up. They work with Lou Giordano, the big, the producer who's worked with a lot of pop punk bands. They sell 13,000 copies. Not enough to make Atlantic Records happy.
Right.
So they go and record their second album for Atlantic in 96, and Atlantic Records says, we don't hear anything. We're not putting this record out. We don't hear a hit. So the band says, we're going to buy the record back from you. Is that okay? And Atlantic said, fine, we'll get you out of this contract. So they buy the record back from Atlantic and then sell it to Ignition
Oh my
which
goodness. Okay.
is the record label that
Oh,
was just mentioned that had a weird lineup of bands. Ignition puts it out and then goes bankrupt. You could not find this record in the store when it came out, in stores, at least in the United States. In the UK, they put it out on Burning Heart Records, which is a Swedish label. They, I believe, work with like Epitaph to do distribution of Epitaph bands in Europe, that sort of thing. So you could get it if you're over in the UK, but you could not. You're gonna have a hard time finding it. They actually did reissues of the record this year on different colored vinyl. So that was obviously a cluster of a situation to have your record get rejected by one record label, and then you take the record to a new label and it promptly goes bankrupt upon releasing it.
oh my
So
goodness.
I might have quit the music industry at that point, but these guys were had more perseverance, and they put out Ashtray in 2000 on Hopeless Records. It's where they would put out their next two albums, Whatever's Got You Down in 2006, and then they took a little break and then put out Trips in 2011. And then, as I mentioned, they were on a 12-year hiatus. They toured the entire time, but they were on a hiatus from recording, and they recorded Stowaway for Pure Noise Records, which is a Nashville record label. Now, the main band is Jason Bebout on vocals and Sergey Lubkov on guitar. They've had a lot of different drummers, like we're talking Spinal Tap level number of drummers in this. At one point, Trey Cool from Green Day played drums in this band. At one point, what's his name? Victor Indrizio, who is a session player. He was the drummer for this band. He also has played for a ton of other artists. Like he did studio work for Chris Cornell and Scott Weiland and Queens of the Stone Age and Gwen Stefani and the Vines and Brandon Flowers and Alanis Morissette. So he's got a resume. Regardless, they've had like 12 drummers, something like that, 10 or 12 drummers. They've had a lot of bass players, and then they've had their second guitar player has changed as well. They had Ryan Sullivan was, I think, the original guitar player. He was only in there for a year. And then James Brogan was the guitar player up until 2000, and then he was replaced by Sean Kennerly. But also Kennerly also played bass at some point, and then Chad Darby is the bass player now. So anyway, that's all the history of that with regards to their history. And one other thing is that they were on the original Jon Stewart show on MTV when their 94 album for Atlantic came out, Clumsy.
Okay.
So, and they're from the Berkeley, California area, you know, the same area as like the Lookout Records, Green Day, Rancid, like all those SoCal punk bands. A lot of, you know, that area. So comments. Let's go back to the original post that had Samiam and let's see. Do we get any comments on Samiam? No, not really. Not really. And yet it won. It got in there. Who understands how this all works? I don't really understand. One thing I wanted to mention is that this was produced by Steven Hagler, and this is the 5th album we have talked about on this podcast that has been produced by Steven Hagler. That might be more than Steve Albini. It's possible.
Could be, yeah.
He also produced the album Endless Bummer by My Head. He produced Pushing the Salmonella Envelope by Jimmy's Chicken Shack. He produced February Sun by Oleander and Recreation by Stanford Prison Experiment. So that's 5. And he also did the second, the sophomore, it's the second record, Slip by Quicksand. The first one's Manic Impression, right? Or Slip first? Whatever.
Slips first.
So he did Slip, and then we talked about Manic Compression. So
yeah.
Either way, what I'm saying is we need to meet this Steven Hagler guy because apparently he's popular with the bands that we talk about. I'm curious, Jay, based on our website, do you happen to know what producer we've talked about the most? I'd be curious. One name I don't think has really ever come up is Brendan O'Brien, which is a divisive name based on whether or not you like his work or not. But I don't think we've ever actually talked about a Brendan O'Brien produced album.
I'd have to look. I was keeping track up until maybe 2 seasons ago, so I'd have to retally everything.
Gotcha.
But yeah, we hadn't done Brendan O'Brien ever.
Yep, Stephen Hagler also worked with like Local H, in terms of bands that we would know. He worked with Fuel and Karma to Burn, the Nixons, the X's.
Wow, a lot of can't dig me out candidates there.
Lots of them. So let's do it. Let's get into this record. Jay, tell me one thing you liked about You Are Freaking Me Out by Sam I Am.
This album sits in the sweet spot for me. It's a mix, I think, between hard rock, alternative, and punk. It's sort of fluid between those three genres. It's all unified around a really strong sense of melody, both from the vocals and the guitars. Guitar wise, it's chunky, it's big sounding, it's not complicated. I think most of the riffs here can be hooky. They got a lot of energy, but for the most part, they're simple. A lot of down strumming, a lot of palm muting. There's some dynamics here where occasionally the second guitar will play a slightly different riff. But most part, both guitars are playing the same thing. They'll do some dynamics where one will come out and come back in, which just really subtle, little simple ways to create dynamics. It's all around, I think, delivering what are mostly pop songs. Like, I think for the most part, these are pretty well crafted, straightforward pop format, songs. So I think all of those elements coming together, aren't fancy. They're just there to deliver the energy and some hooks and some fun. And I think there's, a really, for the most part on this record, a really cohesive sound. Dynamic wise, follows the soft loud thing, but I think does it pretty well. It doesn't, some records, I think when we hear that, it gets a little tiresome, but I think they do a good job with, they shake it, usually it's a palm muted kind of down strum. Sometimes they use bass, which I thought was kind of nice on a couple songs to kind of fill out the verse and, create that dramatic switch. They do a lot, I think, though, maybe where the music is more straightforward. The vocal it's got a little edge to it. It's got some variety. It's very accessible, again, melodic, but I think in the way the delivery varies, it helps. At least for me, kept me engaged in the record and the song. So, like, at its best, the vocals have a really strong chest voice, belting out, some either at almost like a broken yell to really expressive chorus. Things can get a little emotive here and there, a little attitude in there. I even like some of the talk singing that they do. Reminds me a little bit of The Clash or Against Me or something like that, where it's more of a spoken cadence or a little wordy. I think that works too. So there's a good variety, I think, vocally here. Some decent harmonies and stuff they throw on the choruses, help elevate things. So vocally, it's pretty strong. And I think one of the things that varies on the record to kind of pull you through it and keep you interested. She Found Us is probably the best example for me. Just vocally. Sorry, She Found You. Vocally, in terms of the range, it's kind of got a little bit of everything on that song. So yeah, it's in that sweet spot. I'm kind of surprised that I didn't hear this band, because I mean, I heard of the band and spent time listening to the band because it's so close to a lot of bands I liked more in like the early 2000s. So I'm thinking of the Jealous Sound, obviously Knapsack, little Super Chong, Hot Water Music. Even reminded me of a band we reviewed, but I think last year, Doughboys,
Mm-hmm.
were just in that same vein. So, it's just good, feel good music. Got a little edge to it. You put it on, you tap your foot, you sort of get into it. I like the chunky guitars. It's accessible. So, it just hits that sweet spot for me, and it kind of fits in with those bands when I'm in that mood. It would fit on a playlist with those bands, or be a good substitute for listening to the Jealous stuff again. So that's some of the stuff that worked for me. What worked for you?
Well, this is a grower. The first time I put this on, I was like, okay, this is some pop punk, and I've heard this before. But as I listened to it over and over again, I started to get the hooks, appreciate the guitar work that's happening on this record. A song like "Ordinary Life" has a really interesting chord progression. It's not just a straight up punk progression. It's got some weird chord choices, which I appreciate. And that happens here and there on the record, where they do things that are, from a structure standpoint, are very traditional, verse, chorus, verse. The choruses tend to have a shouty, multi-tracked vocal. Sometimes there's a harmonies. And as you go through the record over and over again, those hooks start to really work their way in. And I started to appreciate not only Jason Bebout as a vocalist, but just like him. He's got some really interesting lyrical choices that are happening. Like in there's a Factory, it has a great chorus. And I was like, I think what happened was I listened to Full On. I'm like, okay, this is gonna be like pop punk, and it changed throughout the record enough where I didn't feel like it was 12 of the same songs. I'm gonna leave out "Cry Baby Cry" because that's a Beatles cover, and it's kind of like an oddball at the end of the record. But like, I really feel like they made an attempt to differentiate this, where every song has a unique personality and a unique approach. There are some quiet parts that I was not expecting. When I re-listened to it, I was like, oh, this is pretty, like, this is almost on an emo end of things, where you get the really quiet and then loud explosion parts, which I did not expect that.
Right.
From the listening to the first record. I mean, you get songs like like Mr. Walker or My Convenience, which are like straight ahead pop punk. But then you get like Good Enough. That's the one I was thinking of. Has like a weird shift between these quieter parts. Yeah, I know it's a quiet, loud thing, but they just do just enough to make the difference unique and interesting, that it really drives home the hooks when you get to them. And they get to the hooks pretty fast. I think in Ordinary Life, I want to say the chorus hits by like 35 seconds into the song or something like that.
Yeah.
Like there is not a lot of fat on this record. I don't think a single song is over 5 minutes. Most of them are under 4 minutes. I think two songs go over 4 minutes, and the rest are 3.5 or less or something like that. 3:46 in that range. So it's really, really tight. And they're able to do just enough from song to song where they're not like compromising their sound. And this is I think this is the 5th album by the band. So I don't know what the earlier stuff sounds like. I know that this was, based on reading a little bit, this was a little divisive when it came out because it wasn't as consistently punk, and they took some chances. And She Found You that's a good radio song. I mean, that's a single, and they did push it as a single, and they made a video for it and everything. And it's a shame that people couldn't find the record because the label went bankrupt.
Right.
Kind of reminds me of that Sunny Day Real Estate album when they put out The Rising Tide, and Time Bomb Records just like went bankrupt 6 months later. And I don't know that we'll ever, somebody hopefully will buy the rights back so we can get a reissue of that. If anybody going into this was thinking, this is going to be another Seaweed episode from Tim, like I know I don't always click with like punk and hardcore and pop punk. Like sometimes it leaves me a little cold, but his voice combined with how well this is produced, again, Steven Hagler, it's just super catchy, and it's a quick album. I mean, it's 45 minutes, but I'm not counting it. We'll say 42 minutes because that last song could have been a hidden track. Didn't need to be its own thing.
Yeah.
It's odd. When I heard that, I was like, what is going on? Did I moved on to a new album?
Yeah, I thought
it.
Yeah, I thought it moved on to another record.
It's interesting. That's an interesting choice. Of all the Beatles songs to cover, that's strange, but okay.
Yeah, it's a fine enough cover. Like, I think they do the song justice. I just don't get why it's on the record.
Nope, not at all.
Feels like a B-side kind of fun thing you put out, or maybe you play it live, or I don't know. It doesn't really have a place in this album.
Right. Yeah, totally agree. What doesn't work for you on this record?
There are some moments where the vocals a little weaker. I think Good Enough is a good example for me. I don't love it as much there. Just musically, it starts to get into kind of a generic, less remarkable space. And then there's something about the vocal. It's like a little yippy. Like it doesn't quite have the strength that some of the other songs have. There's some disconnect between some of the songs. Obviously, where I'll talk about Charity, where I like the verse of that song a lot, but like the chorus almost doesn't match it. Like they sound like two different songs. And I like where they're going with the verse there. That's the song that to me has the Against Me kind of vocal delivery in the verse. It's a little wordy. I kind of like that. And it was a change of pace too, just to feel that rhythmically is a little different. It just sounds like they tacked on another chorus that doesn't have anything to do with that verse. It felt like maybe they didn't go all in on what they were trying to do there. there's some outlier tracks. We talked about the Beatles cover. That's one of the big ones. Like, I don't know why it's on this record. Nothing New is another one. It just felt like maybe I don't know, a song that should be on a different record or from a different band. Like there's something about the delivery of it that's
the lead on that song sounds out of place on this record is what sounds weird to me on that song. Like,
yeah, it's like kind of loose and jangly.
yeah,
It doesn't have that like rest of the record. The vocal delivery is, or I'm sorry, the guitar delivery is very sharp, percussive, like locked up both guitars, and that starts to get kind of loosey, and I don't know. It's a bit dialed down. It doesn't have the same energy. So there's some tracks like that just feel off, either underdeveloped or not on the right record. So I guess overall, just some inconsistency. Like when the band's really firing the core songs on this record, it's all making sense to me and gelling. And then there's these outliers, either vocally or song selection or the choruses or whatnot, where it just loses the plot a bit. Anything not work for you?
Well, I want to go back to Charity because that to me is, I agree with you that sounds weird. I feel like what they wanted to do was almost go in like a Goo Goo Dolls direction, but didn't want to actually go there.
Yeah.
Like that song cries for an acoustic guitar.
Yeah.
That verse really should have an acoustic guitar in it. And they probably were like, we're not playing it. We're not doing, that's not our thing.
Right.
But the vibe of the song, it wants an acoustic guitar. It needs an acoustic guitar on that track. Because the tempo and the feel of it is just, it doesn't feel right with when the big electric kicks in. And you're right, it does feel like kind of schizophrenic. And I agree with you on Nothing New. Like that lead sounded like it was from a different band or a different album. It didn't have the same punch and tightness as the rest of the record, which I don't need everything to be like chunky downstrums, but it just didn't work quite as well. And I also agree with you. Sometimes his vocals feel a little strained, or just not fully there. It's rare. I think out of the 13 songs, 12 songs, whatever, he's right there on most of them. It's just a couple spots where when he backs down a little bit, it doesn't work as well. Because when he's ripping and when he's doubling the vocal and giving us these harmonies, and some of them are so catchy and so big that it's undeniable. But in the quieter moments, sometimes the vocal just sounds like not as inspired. And that's probably because of the tempo slowing down. So I can understand why people who were fans of the first 4 records, who are looking at this as a hardcore band, sort of taking some risks here, or what they, what started out to be. I can understand why some people might be like, this is not what we signed up for. Because like their 92 album is Billy, is the genre is skate punk. So I can see where you could go from being a skate punk band to sort of refining and evolving and getting to this record. I also could see why some people would be like, nuh-uh, I can't skate to all these songs.
Right.
I can't do an ollie to Charity. Is an ollie a term for skating, Jay? I don't skate.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Yes.
I thought I heard that in a documentary.
You landed it.
I landed my 360 ollie. Is that I don't know if that's the thing. Anyway, yeah. So I'm pretty much on board with you in terms of what doesn't work, and yeah. So I still find it interesting that we got so few comments, and this is what won the poll. I hope some people have some comments after this episode so they can tell us why they liked it, because we didn't have anybody tell us why they liked it. I did forget. I apologize to do a separate poll for the Worthy Album Better EP decent single for this one. I will not forget going forward. This was just September went by so fast. That's my excuse. I don't know what happened. It seemed like it was August and then now it's October. I don't know what happened.
You didn't have time to go to Bed Bath & Beyond. You just ran. It's just too much going on.
Are they still around? Didn't they go bankrupt?
I thought they got bought.
Oh, did they? Did you see Toys R Us is coming back?
Of course it is.
Yeah. Coming back to a hedge fund controlled, overpriced airport mall near you.
Right.
So this came out, as mentioned, Jay, in the year 1997. That's the year of like what is 97? I don't. That's the like Foo Fighters Color and the Shape. Is that this year? Is that 97? It's definitely like OK Computer and Blur's self-titled record, which we just talked about. Point being, unless you're Blink 182 with like an insanely catchy song, or Green Day, I don't know that this is gonna like find its way into a radio programming. Like, this isn't Nimrod by Green Day, or what was that? Didn't Offspring put out a record this year? I think it was around this year. Wasn't the Hey, why don't you get a job song? Or
oh yeah. Well, I think Blink 182 had a big record. Dude Ranch this year. It's in that ballpark. It's just missing that big single, I think.
Yeah, this is the year of Ixnay on the Ombre by The Offspring, which I was wrong. The next album, Americana, is the one with Pretty Fly for a White Guy.
Sorry.
And Why Don't You Get a Job?
Oh.
This one had gone away.
Those are painful.
Yeah. So
that's when I started. I couldn't listen to rock radio anymore.
Yes.
I haven't listened since. That was pretty much the end.
So, Jay, where do you land on this album? Is it a worthy album, a better EP, or a decent single?
Well, I wanted to say, I've been thinking about the comments. And we've had some albums like this in the past where I think they're just, I don't want to speak for everybody, I'll speak for myself. It's comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's a comfortable album for me. And sometimes when things are just comfortable like that, it's hard to explain why, right? Because you're like, you got to dig deeper on like, well, why is it comfortable to me? Like, which is very like, start pulling back all the layers of like all the things I've ever listened to and whatnot. So I kind of get maybe why some folks, why we're seeing like this winning a poll, but not a ton of deep thoughts on it, because it's just like works, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's comfortable, it works. There's nothing about it that's like off-putting or controversial necessarily. So I think that's a plus. Yeah, I like albums that are weird and challenge me, but this is one of those that I think hits in a sweet spot. It fits with a bunch of other bands that I like, and I dig it. So that said, I am still going to go with an EP. I think there's a strong core songs here that like really work well together, and there's 3 or 4 others that are not quite working as well, and start to lose the script a bit, I think, on the band. So I'm gonna go with the EP, which would be Full On, She Found You, Factory, Ordinary Life, If You Say So. Right. So first 5 tracks, killer. I think the album takes a little bit of a turn there, and comes back with My Convenience, While You Were Waiting, and Happy. think that's what, 7. What do I got there? 8 tracks. I think that feels like a 70s album, solid EP territory where, it's killer from start to finish. Where did you land?
I agree with you. I like the first 5 songs. I would add My Convenience, While You're Waiting. That's probably it. So I'm at 7 songs. That would probably get me to like 20 minutes with this record. So I think Better EP is where I'm at as well. They're definitely ones that I will go back and listen to again, and it definitely makes me interested to hear, because like I said, I really like the new record. It was a worthy album for me, so I am interested in hearing that 94 album Clumsy that came out on the major label, and then also the stuff that they've done after this, because I don't know that like the skate punk stuff from the early years is going to be as interesting to me, but when they matured their sound into this, it definitely becomes a bit more interesting in my overall, pop punk appreciation, because I don't always find it as it doesn't always stick with me long term. Like there's a lot of stuff that I like, I like that, and then I don't go back to it.
Yeah.
So, but I think there's a couple songs here that I definitely want to add to some playlists. So, a couple of better EPs from both of us. And we need to thank our suggestor, Joseph Long, for submitting this. And I agree with him. And you mentioned this slots in well with the Doughboys. I don't agree with Seaweed. I think this is better than Seaweed by a mile.
Musically, I think it's there.
This actually, I mean, some of the stuff that we just had Chip do an interview with Dave Smalley from like Dag Nasty and Down by Law and stuff, and Don't Sleep, I think, is one of his new band. I feel like this fits in well with those artists as well, and those bands that Dave Smalley does, has done over the years. So if you're into that stuff, I would suggest checking this out too. And thanks to everybody who voted. Thanks to everybody who submitted. And if you'd like to do so, you can go to digmeoutpodcast.com and suggest a record there. We've got plenty of polls to administer in the coming months, so please suggest your record, and you can join us on voting on these polls at the DMO Union or Dig Me Out Union. It's also where you can listen to exclusive Aughts episodes. We just put up a poll for our next 2 Aughts episodes, numbers 5 and 6 of the year. We do 6 bonus episodes every year. We have 20-something 80s episodes. They're exclusive to the community. And now we've got Aughts episodes for people to check out. What else? What else is going on at Patreon? Well, you can also vote in the polls for albums selected by our community. And you can watch our video. You can see us on video. It's very exciting. I'm in front of tinfoil. Jay's in front of a blurry white screen. It's fascinating stuff. And
you get it's unedited, so you can hear all the
unedited.
Some chatter and all the mistakes.
You're into that? All the mistakes. And then it's also where you can read the Box newsletter, which comes out every week via Substack. It's a release calendar of new albums, books, movies, TVs, documentaries, etc., relevant to 80s, 90s, and aughts music, plus 2 1-minute reviews, like the one I mentioned of Stowaway by Samiam earlier this year. Every week, 2 reviews. And lastly, you can sign up for that at the website. And lastly, Apple Podcasts is where you go to leave positive feedback for the show. So for Jay, I'm Tim. We're out. We'll be back next week with another episode of Dig Me Out.